Phil, that was Mark Nepo. Interesting story. Cancer survivor, PhD in English literature, writes some books on poetry, and then Oprah Winfrey discovers him, and there you go. Uh, when did you first hear about Mark?
The name is familiar, probably because of his books. And probably, when somebody gets discovered by Oprah, at least
Hmm.
in the old days, it becomes sort of a familiar name.
Hmm.
But I didn't know much about him until I think we were approached by the publisher or publicist to have him on the show. And I said, "Oh, that's a familiar name. Let me look it up." And we decided he'd make a good guess. So really, it's a new discovery of mine as well.
Right. Very interesting guy, very sincere. Obviously, his life situation had a major impact on his work and what he does and what he writes. He's written 19 books. He's very prolific, and it was interesting what he said about his family. I mean, our parents came out of the same generation of you always heard about World War II and you heard about the Great Depression and how important it was to have some financial stability. So somebody who went off and got a PhD in literature at that time for a lot of people was like, really, what are you gonna there wasn't that great practicality that was there. But yeah, yeah.
It
So
made me laugh because it's such a classic tale of
right,
people in our generation, especially. It's like, I'm going to major in philosophy. Well,
yeah,
how are you going to make a living?
yeah, yeah,
Well,
exactly,
you're going to open a philosophy shop on
yeah,
a corner. I
yeah.
mean, what?
You
And so,
can't,
same with poets.
yeah, and also what he said about nature, I totally related to. Yeah, you're from Brooklyn, he's from Brooklyn, I'm from Jersey City across the river, and going to Bergen County, New Jersey, to me was going into the wilderness. It was the suburbs. I was an urban creature. Walking somewhere and seeing animals, in the wild, it was unthinkable. I went to camp in New Hampshire when I was a kid, and I remember coming out the first night and seeing this how many stars there were in the sky. It terrified me. It was like, what is this? So that part, yeah. But on the other hand, nature, like for many of us, including Mark, it's absolutely inspired me. But I was never one that felt at home in the wild.
Yeah, I was like that as a kid too because I grew up in Brooklyn and I joked with him about where he found woods. There were parks in Brooklyn. In fact, there's
Right.
a very big one, and you could there's trees and you can walk among them, but not what we would consider woods.
Yeah,
I didn't
probably not
discover
going to get lost.
woods
Yeah.
until hmm?
You're probably not going to get lost in any of
No,
those
well,
parks.
but people would go on vacation and stuff and discover woods. I became, as a grown up, more comfortable in the woods than I would have been as a kid because, and I came to love it very much. But I know what he means when you grow up somewhere. I mean, I would get scared in the woods, my first exposure to it. Whereas I could walk the streets of New York
Right.
and somebody from the countryside would be terrified.
Right.
But I feel fine on the
Right.
subways in any city or in New
Exactly the same.
But
Yeah.
nevertheless, but getting back to the
Right.
point, the experience of being in nature seemed to be an important factor in his own spiritual development,
Right.
and that's something we uh, maybe take for granted sometimes, but
Right.
it's an entry point into the realm of spirit that's a lot easier and more
Right.
accessible than walking city streets.
We've had many of our guests mention that they're part of their spiritual practice or a way to introduce people to spiritual practice is to spend time in nature. And by nature, they mean removed from man made objects in the mountains, in the woods, in the desert. And if you look at spiritual traditions, that's usually where they came from. Many out of the even the desert, and people talk about going into the tropical rainforest or being out on the ocean and having these deep insights, these feelings of unity. And I think that is something that for many people is becoming more difficult to do because we tend to live in large urban areas. Most people, I think the vast majority of people on Earth, and that it's important to do two things. One is protect the environment so that nature it continues to exist in its natural form, and that we if we have the occasion to take advantage of that. I mean, I don't do it enough, but when I do it, and I get out there, even sometimes looking at sunsets and skies and whatnot, one feels there's a bigger universe, and somehow you're connected to it, which I feel is the basis of at least the major aspect of spirituality.
Yes. There's a reason that the great poets and the great songwriters evoke nature and get inspired by nature and get closer
Hmm.
to the to that which transcends the material because
Hmm.
it's there. You get it's awe inspiring and there's wonder, and the silence of the woods and the majestic quality of certain places. It raises the awareness. There's no
Right,
question
right,
about it.
yeah, right. No,
But he also made a point that there are urban poets
right,
like um, a Walt Whitman who saw the divine in the people of the streets and
right.
in the buildings.
Right.
So
Yeah, I must say, for me, I mean, a lot of my spiritual insights or curiosities were inspired in New York or in Jersey City, where I grew up, seeing people how they interacted, what it was like. So spirituality is all inclusive.
yeah,
A spiritual life, as I understand it, is found everywhere, so one can find insight and anything. And I wonder, just like if you took an urban kid and you brought him in the country, they were like, wow, this is amazing. I'm having some deep spiritual experience. I've also heard kids from Iowa, where I've lived for a long time, who have gone to New York for the first time or Chicago, and they've gone away saying, wow, I was so deeply moved and I felt my internal experience was more powerful. Something was very enlivened by that. So
yeah,
I think both have their value, and both should exist. And again, we don't want nature
they
as we
do,
know it to
Dennis.
disappear. Huh?
They will exist whether you want them to
Yeah,
or
yeah,
not.
exactly,
We're
exactly.
becoming a much more urban world, of
Right,
course. So we have to make access
right. And we have to also
more.
protect the mountains and the forests and the oceans from being overwhelmed by the debris and the sloppiness of human living. So
Well,
it's a major
right
issue there.
now, the government is trying to reduce the
Right.
national parks and monuments. So maybe this is a reminder to people that those are precious and should be
Absolutely.
preserved. And getting back to Mark Nepo, another important avenue of access into the sacred is poetry
Right.
and good writing and graceful writing that uplifts the soul. And that's a big part of
Right.
why he's become
Right.
such a popular figure in modern
And I
spirituality.
think poetry is, in this generation, having an upsurge in popularity in a lot of the states. I've gone to some what are called poetry slams, and I was blown
Yeah,
away by the level of insight and the honesty, and it was an amazing experience. If you haven't been to a poetry slam, and I'm sure there's no two alike, try it. It's pretty amazing,
yeah.
and for
Well,
those of us who are spiritual seekers, I think there's a lot of potential there for deepening one's
the other
insights.
day I was watching Stephen Colbert's
Yep.
show, and he had a guest, Chance the Rapper.
Oh yeah, I know all about him.
Now,
Yeah.
rap music
Right.
and hip hop was
Hmm.
a younger generation than ours,
Right.
and it took me a very long time, just as it took our parents a long time to appreciate that rock and roll had,
Right.
aesthetic and musical value. It took me a long time to appreciate hip hop and rap. Well, this guy was fabulous,
Yeah.
and it was chilling how beautiful and profound
No.
the
It's
performance was.
yeah, it's storytelling. Rap is basically
Yeah,
storytelling, and as is all music, ultimately, I think, and I'm somewhat familiar with him, and from what I've heard and what everybody has told me, he has tremendous depth, and he's very young.
yeah,
Let's try to get him on
yes.
the show.
Okay, it's a
We'll do it.
deal.
All right.
Good.
Till next
Thanks,
time.
Dennis.
All right. Over and out.